Kia ora Year 12s, it's Ms Mac here. I've decided to start some videos for you. There's actually already quite a few videos in the tutorial folder. This is an unemployment, and in the other sections of your Year 12 Moodle page you'll find other videos that I've done over time. Yeah, so they're there for you to watch. If they're not useful, then let us know what you would like, and we're happy to try and accommodate you. Voice withholding, if my voice lasts out. So what I want to do just now is to go through the labour market. So I'm just literally going to go through the labour market model, point out some important things that you should know and might help you to understand how it all comes together. And then I'll do a couple of videos later looking at changes in the demand or supply of labour. So there you go, there's demand and supply for labour. You learned about markets in year 11, and now we're looking at a specific factor market, which is resource market, the labour market. So we were going through the demand for labour, the supply of labour, and then we're going to put them together and look at when they're in equilibrium versus when they're not. So let's have a quick run through. Just as a hint, this PowerPoint that I'm showing you is actually on the Moodle 12 Eco Moodle page under unemployment. It's about the second or third file down, I think. So it's there for you to use as well. All right, so the demand for labour. So there's like this little example here, and I'm actually like what it's really showing you is this idea of derived demand. There's kind of like two things to think about, and it means like where does the demand for labour come from? What influences the demand for labour? So what this is trying to look at here is the idea of ignore this. Like you don't need to know that even at year 13 anymore. This is old school. It comes from the productivity of the worker. So what it's saying is that if you are productive, like you can contribute more to production than the last person employed, or like you seem like someone who's really efficient and a great worker, then there's going to be high demand for your labour, right? This kind of makes sense. Whereas if you're not particularly productive, then there's going to be low demand for your labour. And you're probably thinking, well, how would they know? They don't know. So when you go for a job interview, you can't necessarily tell how productive someone's going to be. You can make assumptions though based on, say, their CV. Why do you have to list experience, give references? Sorry, I'm just going to have to throw a lolly. Why do you have to list qualifications? If you have qualifications and qualifications in a certain area, that would kind of signal to a possible employer that you're a bit smarter, or that you have actually worked in this field before, or that you know what you're doing, as opposed to someone who doesn't have qualifications. Good interview though would always want to just see if you're not just like the piece of paper, but you can actually work hard as well. But so important thing to kind of think about here is demand for labour. Something that does influence whether there'll be high or low demand for someone's labour is the perceived productivity of the worker, which is basically what this slide is about. What I don't think it mentions, it's really important, which kind of annoys me, is actually the demand for labour also comes from the product you produced. Okay, so I take issue with this slide a little bit and would want to add, I don't have my magical pen with me today, but it comes from so if you are I use the example of a builder, if there's high demand for houses, there's going to be high demand for builders because they build the houses, right? So demand for labour comes from the product you produce, plus that idea of productivity. Just let me, sorry, I was just interrupted by a student there. So I kind of I'm not opposed to what's on the screen here, but I do just like to point out that what you need to think about is demand for labour does come from this productivity idea, extra output you create, but more importantly, it comes from the demand for the product that you produce. So right now, tourism workers, there's not a lot of demand for tourism. Well, there's demand for it, but we can't have it because we can't necessarily, Aucklanders can't travel, for example, and overseas people can't come. So there's low demand for that product, therefore there's low demand for the workers. Yeah, derived demand just means where does it come from? Derived, it comes from the demand for the product you produce. It also does come from your productivity. All right, and so what you see here is, just get familiar with this model. Demand for labour slopes downwards, looks suspiciously like a normal demand curve. Well, it is, but just the thing to remember here is that the demand for labour comes from employers, so like the firms. All right, whereas it's kind of the reverse of what you would think from a normal market situation. This is not your consumers, it's not your households, it's your firms. Here, the quantity of labour is literally how many hours, how many hours employed, how many jobs created, employment. Yeah, and W stands for wages. Now, we're going to sort of maybe see it later, I can't remember, but it's just W by itself. So this is what we call the nominal wage, meaning it hasn't been adjusted for changes in the price level, inflation or deflation. So when you just see the W by itself, that means nominal wages, whereas if it's got W over P, that means real wages. It has been adjusted for changes in the price level. Okay, so let's continue on, see what this amazing PowerPoint has for us. Supply of labour. All right, so number of who is able and willing to work. Households. All right, so remember the circular flow model that households own the resources and then they supply them to firms to make stuff. So when we talk about the supply of labour, we are talking about households supplying their labour for firms to make stuff. Right, so like if you think about it practically speaking, there is a maximum amount of people who can work at any one time. Like there's like the limit to our population, the limits of the working age population, right? So QN does signify the maximum number who can work. I usually call it QF. Like if you call it QM, that's not like wrong. You could go there. I put QF like full as opposed to maximum. That's fine. The supply of labour. So it's going to show you a couple of things here. Like let's just speed it up. All right. So we're plotting in our supply curve. Now you'll note it becomes vertical at the maximum level. Yeah, sometimes you see it backwards bending. I kind of told my class about that. Maybe I shouldn't have. That's just the idea that when you get to really, really high wages, some people actually choose to supply less labour because they're earning so much that they'd rather like have more leisure time. They can afford it. They don't have to work as much. Yeah, you don't actually need to know that. But here we go. Slopes upwards to the right and becomes vertical once it reaches the maximum level. Why is that? So let's have a think about it. Oh, I thought there was going to be more. Okay, so what we're looking at here is that at low wages, not many people will supply their labour, right? Because they're like, it's not worth my time bothering to supply my labour at such a low wage. Whereas as the wage rate increases, people are like, I'm thinking that I'll go out and get a job now. I'll supply my labour because, when I think about what I'm doing now, nothing, watching Netflix, this is more worth my time. And so what we think about when we think about the supply of labour is the opportunity cost of not working. When wages are high, that opportunity cost is higher. Like you're giving up quite a lot of income potentially that you won't be earning if you're just sitting at home doing nothing, right? Whereas when wages are low, it's kind of like, yeah, it's not really worth my time going to work. Why would I bother? That's not that much. I'd rather just hang out and not work. So when you think about the supply of labour and what determines it, wages do affect the opportunity cost of not working, i.e. what you're giving up on. But the other things to think about, particularly the supply of labour, is school leaving age. So if we were to lower the school leaving age, there were more people that would be able to leave school and go and work. Whereas if you conversely raise the school leaving age, there's less people who can work. Things like the health of the nation would affect it, like people who are well enough to go and work. They've got idea of ability. So you kind of got like population size will affect it as well, births and deaths, immigration, migration. They will affect like the number of people who could actually work. And that's generically the labour market as a whole, like for everything. If you go into specific labour markets, like if we're just talking about the general labour market at the moment, like New Zealand as a whole, but if we were to look at different industries, so like professions like teaching, there are particular restraints on the market in terms of you have to have certain qualifications, you have to be registered, so not anybody can enter that market. All right, whereas something like retail work tends to be more open, like anyone can go work there. There's no restraints like qualifications needed. You don't need to belong to a professional body to work in a supermarket. So there tends to be a lot more people available to work in that market. So just thinking about things like, well, let's call it criteria to work in that particular industry or profession can affect the number of people who are available to work. I think a week or so ago, my class looked at accountants, and we looked at like what if they made like the entry requirements, say the chartered accountant exam, maybe if they made it harder or insisted that you needed more like professional qualifications, then that would make it harder for people to get into that market, so there would be less supply of labour available. Right? I'll deal with that like in another video, but just supply of labour is about the opportunity cost not working, but it's also about things like the school leaving age, population size, migration, anything that makes more or less people available to work. So let's put it all together, because I believe that's there we go. And so what we do is we put them together, supply, demand, and you do have an equilibrium point, but notice not price, it is W equilibrium. So it's saying the equilibrium wage, the current going rate in the labour market. This would be kind of like the average wage, I guess. And QE would be how many people are actually employed. So the distance between 0 and QE is specifically how many are employed. The wage, just note here again, there's no P, so this is just what we call nominal wages. Sometimes we leave it off because it just makes it a bit more simple and kind of like less complicated for you, but it's something that you might want to come back to later. All right, what else do we see here? Voluntary unemployment. Now this is a little bit, I don't know, controversial, but theoretically, if a labour market is in equilibrium, so it's where supply for labour equals the demand for labour, the only people who are not working choose to be not working, and we call them voluntary unemployed. And that's the gap between QE and QM, or when I draw it, QF. So the idea is that these people here, like this gap between QE and QM, represents people that are holding out for a higher wage. You know, they can supply their labour, but they're like not choosing to because this is too low. And it may be because they perceive that they're worth more, which could be true, to be quite honest. Yeah, but for them, the opportunity cost of not working is too low. If that wage starts to increase, though, then they may start to rethink the situation and come in and supply it. So just note, at equilibrium in the labour market, where supply for labour equals the demand for labour, the only unemployment is voluntarily unemployed. All right, and the distance between 0 and QE is who is actually employed, and that would be like the current wage. This is just a general labour market. To look at like doctors and nurses, you'd have to look at the labour market for that specific occupation. All right, let's see what's coming up next. All right, oh yeah, so it's just saying, yeah, what I just explained. Oh, there's more. Okay, so what it's going to show you here is if the wage was to be above equilibrium, see that's equilibrium, what if the wage was to go above? Remember from late last year, that's not equilibrium, okay, it's going to create a surplus. Yeah, when the price is above the market equilibrium and the price of labour is wages, then it creates what we call a surplus. The quantity demanded, so Q1 is where that wage intersects demand for labour, so that's the QDL, and where it intersects the demand for labour is the quantity supplied of labour. And so because the supply is greater than the demand, you have a surplus. And we actually have a name for that. We call that involuntarily unemployed. Right, and shortly I'm going to do a video to kind of go, right, we have that in New Zealand. Yeah, but what the reasons for that could be is, why would a wage be above equilibrium? The minimum wage, next video. Another reason could be because unions are like forcing the wage up higher than, say, what the market is offering. They're wanting their workers to be paid more. It could be a situation like we have now where the market wage is like so high and then there's a fall in demand for labour or something due to like COVID, for example, but wages get sticky, they don't fall, and you kind of think about it like people are really reluctant to get paid less. Yeah, they're kind of like, I have a contract, you agreed to pay me this rate, so I'm not going to accept a fall in my wages. So sometimes, particularly due to the idea of contracts and like the power of unions and industry bodies, wages can get stuck above, say, the going rate, and that can cause a situation of a surplus, which in the labour market we call involuntary unemployment. So I'm going to leave you with that, but I'm going to go back to here because this is really, let's go back. Yeah, let's go to here. Okay, no, let's go here. This is the key thing I want you to think about, just in general, like the labour market. The wages are allowed to settle at equilibrium. You have the level employed, and who is not employed are voluntarily unemployed. Okay, so that's just with a market working properly, no minimum wage, no sticky wages. Theoretically, this would be what would be going on. So I hope this kind of rush through explanation is helpful to you. I'm going to post it on Moodle, and you can use it if you wish to help you with your revision. And then just if you are interested, we'll have some stuff on the minimum wage, and then maybe some changes to demand and supply of labour. All right, ka kite.